What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It is Michael here and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. Today I have a very special build for you, and he is called, or rather he calls himself, the Steve. The Steve is going to really play into the wacky side of Fallout you may not have felt in a while, and we've definitely made this character very effective too. In fact, he's got Scott's favorite playstyle in all of New Vegas, so get ready to have a lot of fun. Now let's talk about the Steve and his Suicide Squad, which literally seems like a Suicide Squad with how they act and the playstyle of this build. We're obviously taking inspiration from the Suicide Squad movie coming out, but I definitely want to clarify that we're not recreating anything in it. This build, like all our builds, remains lore-friendly and 100% contained to the Fallout universe. We're simply taking inspiration from the concept of a cast of crazy, unique characters working together in an effective yet chaotic killing squad. We wanted to bring that kind of thing to a New Vegas playthrough, and I can guarantee you that we have succeeded. Think melee, think explosives, think unarmed weapons that use explosives. This build loves throwables, and he tends to bomb the life out of his enemies, leaving everyone crippled or dead before he runs in with his posse to hammer, punch, and bite to clean up the rest. Also, I will let you know now that we're not using any large explosive weapons, such as the Fat Man. We're sticking to throwables, but you can use the grenade rifle if you want. Also, if you forgot, Fallout 4 took that away from thrown explosives, so be sure to take back that amazing feeling by playing this build. Now let's get into the backstory. Who is the Steve? Steve is the name given to this character at birth, but it is he who names himself the Steve later on in life. He was born in Wyoming and was brought up living in a comic book store, or at least it used to be a store before the bombs fell. Steve and his granddad lived together and used the comic book store as their house. Goes without saying that he loved comic books, heroes, and all things geeky. He definitely wasn't a nerd though. He wasn't smart enough to be a nerd. Steve's parents weren't around and he was never told why. He didn't receive much guidance as a child, as much as his grandfather thought he did a good job teaching him, and the Steve didn't exactly have a genetic head start either. He and his entire family were severely unintelligent. Perhaps that's why his parents weren't there. Maybe their stupidity killed them. The Steve would never know. As Steve grew older, his body developed more, and it became obvious that he was actually very strong. Steve was pleased to see this, and it made him look more like his idols, like the characters he adored in the comics. Steve had a bigger supply of good condition pre-war comic books than anyone he ever knew. The same thing went for action figures. He loved action figures and was very passionate about his favorite one, Man-to-Man. Comic book characters were the true masculine role models in Steve's life, and they taught him the values of helping others, of fighting for what's yours, and of having fun in the process. They taught him the importance of teamwork, risk, and companionship, although unfortunately for Steve, not many people wanted to be his friend. As Steve grew older, he became even lonelier. His granddad passed away right before his 15th birthday, and the teenage boy inherited a bunch of money. He lived alone in the comic book store for the next 6 years. He bought his own food and mainly kept to himself. However, eventually he started meeting a lot more people once he decided to earn money for himself. Otherwise, he'd just be running out. The Steve started what he called a hero business, and he was pretty much a self-glorified errand boy. He called himself the Steve. It was the best name he could think of, and he'd go to people's houses, see if they needed anything done, and then he'd do it for money. He called these jobs missions, and they brought some much needed enjoyment back into his life. Eventually, people started taking advantage of Steve though, leading him to do more questionable and dangerous tasks. These tasks were no match for the Steve, however, and he was sailing smoothly through it all until he eventually let a client and so-called friend into his house. This man was obsessed with comic books and action figures too, and he stole the one thing that Steve held dear, Man-to-Man, the action figure of course. The thief took Man-to-Man and left before he could be caught in the act. Steve saw him when he was running off into the distance with his favorite toy, and began chasing him, but to no avail. The Steve didn't have super speed. He disappeared over the border heading in the direction of New Vegas. Steve just kept going that way after him, and it took a hell of a lot of time. As a young adult, he met many people during his travels and had many companions on his journey, developing his team building skills as time went by. The Steve also developed his combat skills by carrying around a big bat to strike any attackers with. He wasn't sure if he'd ever see man-to-man again, but he knew he would gain valuable experience from his adventure anyway. He wanted to become a legend and develop himself as the Steve even further. His companions were always very varied. They ranged from Protectrons to Raiders, from Radroaches to Brahmin. He had a puppy too at one point, and he always had a soft spot for canines. Eventually, Steve winds up in Nevada and gets a job with the Mojave Express. He works as a courier for a year or so to get more money, until eventually he's shot in the head, and wakes up later in Goodsprings. This Steve will awaken in Goodsprings feeling no different to before he was shot in the head. He will, however, not be able to remember the appearance of the man he was tracking down. He will want to know who shot him though, as he believes it might be the same guy who took man-to-man. This Steve will embark on his adventure again, but this time he's going to build a super team. His very own squad of wacky badass members willing to die to achieve their mission. The Steve plans to search everywhere thoroughly to find man-to-man and will complete as many quests as he can to get by, gain experience, and become a legend, of course. The Steve will often ask for money if he doesn't feel he's getting enough, although ultimately he will take what he's given. He's not a greedy person, he just wants to feel like he's valuable. This Steve has low intelligence, so obviously he can be misled easily, and you can actually use this as rationalization for doing some of the darker quests in the game. You can essentially do bad jobs that bad people ask you to do while still maintaining the whole hero role-playing side, because you're not really aware of what you're doing and how it's wrong. Being incredibly naive and stupid, this build will not be siding with Yes Man. He simply follows orders and loves to do so. Therefore, he'll be siding with House. You can go with the Legion or the NCR if you rationalize it, but we preferred keeping this incredibly strange individual independently sided. Go forth into the wasteland and stay safe, but more importantly, have fun. The Steve will enter the wasteland with 10 strength, 5 perception, 10 endurance, 5 charisma, 1 intelligence, 5 agility, and 4 luck. He's tough, he's traveled far, he's strong, and he's dumb. That's all very obvious. We're going to have high health and be a natural at melee fighting. Like many of our new Fallout New Vegas builds, we're not going to be giving you endgame special stats, as that'll depend on whether or not you use the intense training perk, and what choices you make in DLC, and what implants you get, and so on. We've chosen these stats based on the backstory of this build, and the perks we're choosing. Skills also factor in for both role-playing and effectiveness. Your tag skills are going to be melee weapons, unarmed, and explosives. Melee weapons and unarmed are the skills that many heroes use, and it's what the Steve is genetically suited towards. He also carried a bat during his travels previously. Melee characters are also super fun and go perfectly in a playstyle with explosives. If you've never played an explosives melee character before, you really need to give it a try. Explosives aren't exactly something that Steve grew up with, however, after regularly finding dynamite and fireworks on his previous travels, he became fascinated by its use. Clearly, these are all offensive skills and correlate to certain weapon types in the game. Your minor skills, though, are going to be repair and medicine. We only wanted 2 minor skills as we do have low intelligence and it does take us a long time to boost our skills up. Repair will allow you to keep your gear in good condition, and medicine will help you stay alive through the use of more effective stim packs. You'll be needing them as you learn to harness explosives. The playstyle for this build is very straightforward, and I basically explained it before in the intro. You basically shower your opponents with thrown explosives as you fight alongside 2 main companions, and then once you're done with your explosives or simply coming into close range with them and your companions, switch out to unarmed or melee weaponry and finish them off. By the way, I want to stress the fact that you can't help but sometimes hit your companions with grenades. That's alright though, they're tough and won't feel a thing. We'll get into the perk section shortly, and when we do, remember that it's up to you how you allocate skill points, and when you pick perks, we simply explain the essential perks, so be aware of what the perk requirements are. The traits we've chosen for this build are Heavy-Handed and Wild Wasteland. Heavy-Handed makes you do 20% more damage with melee and unarmed, but the downside is that you suffer minus 60% critical damage with melee and unarmed. That said, we're not caring all that much about criticals really, and with only 4 luck, that drawback doesn't even matter. Wild Wasteland definitely fits the wacky vibes of the Steve build, and by picking this perk, it ensures you encounter some very interesting scenarios to say the least. When it comes to the essential perks, we've got a solid amount to pick. I will say now that we're not getting the Slayer perk, as this build isn't incredibly agile. So the perks in no particular order are Heave Ho, Demolition Expert, Bloody Mess, Stone Wall, Hit the Deck, Adamantium Skeleton, Unstoppable Force, Piercing Strike, Splash Damage, Mad Bomber, and Super Slam. Heave Ho increases your throwing velocity and range by 50% with all thrown weapons, melee or explosive, and also affects explosive weapons that fire in an arc. Demolition Expert will make you do 60% more damage with all explosive weapons after you get all 3 ranks, and Bloody Mess will add 5% damage to this and also give you more violent deaths. It's mainly for fun, Bloody Mess. Explosives get even more fun with splash damage, which gives all explosives a 25% larger area of effect. Using all these dangerous perks, you'll often find explosives are causing you some damage too, and that's why we have Hit the Deck for 25 more damage threshold against explosives, including our own. Adamantium Skeleton aids this too by making our limbs only receive 50% damage. Stonewall is another great defensive perk choice. It gives you +5 to your DT against all melee and unarmed attacks, and importantly, you can't be knocked down in melee combat. Also, if you want more access to convenient throwable explosives, you can craft them by using the Mad Bomber perk. We recommend you get this one later on. There's tons of dynamite at the start of the game to leave you satisfied. Looking more at the melee perks though, Unstoppable Force will make your damage 4 times as strong against a blocking opponent, and Piercing Strike will make you ignore 15 points of their DT while you're using melee or unarmed. Finally, the Super Slam perk gives you the chance to knock down your opponents with melee and unarmed strikes. This is very powerful. Also, try to learn as many of the special unarmed combat moves in the game as you can. Looking at the gear, you'll want any explosives that you can carry. Dynamite will be a staple straight out of the gate, as powder gangers have heaps of it, and if you have the mercenary pack and all that, you start with a grenade rifle, which you have my permission to use. Use whatever explosives you want, just try to keep most of it to throwables if you can, and stay away from the big fat man stuff. Things like the MFC grenades that you craft will be awesome later on. Grenades of all kinds will also be staple weaponry by then too. Plasma grenades, pulse grenades, frag grenades, everything. Thrown melee weapons can obviously be used too, like throwing spears, but they aren't necessary and they're definitely not a main part of the playstyle or a part that you have to have at all. Standard melee weapons are, of course, though. So are unarmed weapons, as much as I hate using those two words together. So we're going to be using the chainsaw, which you can buy from gunrunners as an upgrade, and Two-Step Goodbye. You can buy this from gunrunners as well. Two-Step Goodbye is a power fist, which is very strong and also implants an explosive in enemies if you kill them with a critical hit. Now, we're not using critical hits all the time, but it definitely does happen, as you'll see in the footage. Do be careful of the explosive effect though, it can be particularly deadly. Now obviously a chainsaw is just a chainsaw and it slices people up. Another awesome melee weapon we're collecting is the unique super sledge called Oh Baby. You can get this in Charleston Cave, and we recommend giving this to Lily, who will be part of your crazed Suicide Squad. More about that soon. As a mid-game melee weapon, you can use Knock Knock, the unique Fireman's Axe. In terms of armor, we're going to use reinforced Sierra Madre armor and the helmet. This is very sturdy light armor, which you can get from multiple locations in the Dead Money DLC. It's pretty good, and it definitely fits the aesthetic. You look like a wacky makeshift superhero, while also looking pretty cool too. Now before getting this armor, you can wear whatever you think makes the Steve look like a hero most. Now with companions, you can make a squad of whoever you like, but we prefer Lily and Rex. What's more wacky than a Nightkin grandma and a dog with another dog's brain? We recommend using either Violetta's brain for more speed or Ray's brain for more attack power. Address whatever you find lacking in your squad's abilities, but you're probably not lacking in anything really. Treat your squad well, use them appropriately, and enjoy the absolute havoc that you three will create. And that concludes yet another Fallout New Vegas build on FudgeMuppet. I hope you enjoyed this build. Thank you so much for watching the video this far, and for clicking the like button if you did that too. We're really thankful for all the positivity this series is getting, and the more people love it, the more builds we'll put out. If you love role-playing and love builds, or just want to follow us on social media, because you can, our social media links are in the description as always. My name is Michael. Thank you once again for tuning into FudgeMuppet, and I'll see you all next time with some more FudgeMuppet goodness.